close the video panel so that everybody can see the presentation.
I still see you.
Oh, you still see me?
I do.
But all right, well, I'm going to stop my video.
All right. So just a quick agenda for today's webinar. I'm going to start with some introductions, just tell you a little bit about Nannette and myself and our firm, Cultivating Wealth. And then Nannette's going to go into really the meat of the presentation, talking about college financial planning and her process that she's developed over working with many families on helping them make smart decisions when it comes to spending money on college, which is probably the biggest financial transaction of your child's life so far, and one of the biggest ones of yours too. And then we'll just kind of close up with how financial planning can help in this process, and we should have time for some Q&A at the end. Can you go ahead and advance the slide?
Yeah, I'm trying to do that and it doesn't want to do that. All right, I'll just do it that way.
Okay. So I'm Sarah Stanich. I'm a certified financial planner since 2010, and also a certified divorce financial analyst. I'm the founder of the firm Cultivating Wealth, and Nannette Kamien joined us in 2019. She's also a CFP and CDFA, but she's really had like more of a specialty around this college planning, which is an important part of financial planning, and is the author of a book on the topic called Crazy College Money, which is also available at Amazon.com. And I know you've given some workshops with University of California, San Diego as well on this topic, right, Nannette?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then just quickly about our firm. So it's the Stanich Group, and then we have a DBA of Cultivating Wealth. We're an SEC registered investment advisor. We meet with clients virtually nationwide. We were actually doing that before the whole coronavirus thing, but I'm glad that we were. I'm located in New York, and Nannette is in San Diego, California. So we are kind of coast to coast, and we have a third planner with our firm also in New York City. Our services are financial planning, investment management, and we do have a specialty around divorce financial analysis. What really sets us apart is we are independent, so we're not affiliated with one of the big wirehouse banks or firms, and we're fee only. We actually cannot receive any commissions, and so if we make any recommendations to you, that there's no commission for us on the back end, and we are fiduciaries, so we have a higher level legal responsibility to make recommendations which are in our client's best interest. So I do have a disclaimer here. It's always in these presentations, but everything we're doing here is kind of educational in nature, and you should always discuss your situation with the appropriate professional. This presentation does not constitute legal or tax advice. It's really meant to be educational, get you learning more about how things might apply to your situation, and then we recommend that you do a little more research before making decisions on your own or with your tax or financial advisor.
Sarah, can I make one other comment too about what sets us apart, especially in the college planning space? A lot of folks out there that call themselves college planners are either selling investments to save for college or potentially insurance products that can help with some of the asset planning. So it's just important to be mindful of the incentives that the advisor that you're talking with has to use certain products and giving you a solution for your situation.
Excellent point. Okay, do you want to go ahead and take it away, Nannette?
Yeah, sure. So obviously there's a couple reasons why we're here. The coronavirus has really upended the college admissions and planning. I'm part of a lot of Facebook groups, and there's a lot of discussion with regards to what kids are going to do next year that just graduated from high school, what's going to happen with admissions, testing. AP testing has been a mess. I think there's a lot of uncertainty right now, and parents are sort of freaking out and trying to figure out how to plan. And unfortunately, this sort of comes on top of what's been happening in the college space, in the past 10 to 15 years, where costs to attend have been increasing faster than inflation. There's a student loan debt crisis, for both students and parents. And parents are really searching for information. I see questions all the time on these Facebook groups where, parents are asking for advice, they're asking for help because it's not obvious where to get answers to their questions. So we're hoping to, help provide some answers and, give you some things to think about as you go through the next couple of years. So it's interesting because when I was doing this presentation last week and updating it, I pulled this from the Chronicle of Higher Education website, and the planning for in-person was at 64% at that time, or 65%. And I actually pulled it again yesterday, it was at 63, and then I pulled it again this morning, and planning for in-person is down to 61% for the fall. And I think that's going to continue to drop as the coronavirus sort of becomes a little bit more out of control.
Oh, wow. See what
Yeah.
it is at Labor Day.
Yeah. So, and the proposing a hybrid model has gone up, waiting to decide is starting to decline. Really honestly, nobody knows what's going to happen with the fall of 2020. And so it's really important to think about all of your decisions in the context of what, the time of, time of the world that we're in right now, and that there's a lot of uncertainty. So you're not the only one with questions. So as I mentioned before, the cost to attend, just in tuition and fees is rising faster than inflation. So this is a depiction of the last 20 years, 30 years, how the prices have increased. And so this is in constant dollars. So it's really increased more than twofold. Over the last 30 years, the cost to attend, especially private nonprofit four-year colleges, they've definitely increased at a higher pace than some of the other kinds of schools. But I've seen some promising numbers recently that in the past couple of years, this rate of increase has gone down. And I think with all of the everything going on, colleges are not really going to be able to increase their costs as they have, or increase their tuition prices as they have before. So I do see some good news here, even though the last 30 years have really not been good for families and trying to figure out how to pay for school. The other thing that I mentioned is this student loan debt crisis. In 2018, the amount of student loan debt outstanding was over $1.5 trillion, and it does increase really every day. And that's a big deal. That's really the highest amount of debt outstanding besides mortgages in our economy. And the strange thing is that people think of student loans as just for students. And over the past couple of years, maybe the last 5 years, as you can see from the chart on the right, the average parent loan debt has increased higher than the average student debt. And that to me is a really big warning sign that parents are starting to take on more of a burden of borrowing for school. And we'll talk a little bit about why that's not a good idea in the presentation, but it's just an interesting statistic. And one of the reasons I think that is because students are really capped at how much they can borrow from the federal programs. And they're not really able to access the private loan options without having a cosigner. So it's really, parents are really feeling the pressure here to borrow.
Yeah, and I think it just really shows how different things are for our kids than they were for us. So I graduated from college in the 90s, and that's been a big change, and even bigger from where my parents were, of course.
Right, same with me. Okay, so when we talk about planning for college, a lot of parents want to jump right into financial aid, and they want to jump right into looking at schools. And what I recommend people do is really take a step back and look at their own emotions and their own finances. And because this is one of the most stressful decisions you're going to make in your child's life, there's a couple of reasons why it really is so stressful. A big part of it is what I call the college marketing machine. You'll see every day there's news out there about rankings, the brand name of colleges, how important that is, obviously college sports are a big deal. Everybody thinks about, trying to send their kids to their alma mater potentially, even though it might be very, very difficult to get in compared to when you went there. And then the PSAT marketing, when your child takes the PSAT, I'm sure as many of you know, you start to receive mounds and mounds of what used to be paper mail, and I think there's still some of that, but I think now it's very, electronically concentrated, but there's just a lot of hype out there. And then also there's more of an internal pressure from, your kids' high school. A lot of high schools out there are very concerned with college preparatory courses. You've got other parents who are, putting on the sweatshirt of the school their kid got admitted to. And then kids' friends are really, always asking, where are you going to go to school? Where are you going to go to college? And it's just a really stressful time. So, I just want you to take a few moments to sort of acknowledge that and think about, where that pressure is coming from for your family. And then, I always walk people through an exercise where they look at their emotions and their experience. Everybody has had their own experience. Like Sarah said, it was very different 30 years ago, 25 years ago. Did you pay for your own school? Did you borrow? Did you take out, maybe $10,000 in student loans and you really felt like that was a lot at that time? Did you have a part-time job? Did you receive scholarships? I think everybody sort of has their own experience, and you take that and you combine it with what your partner's potential experience was. Many of you may not even know. If you met your partner after you graduated from college, and maybe you even had paid off some student loans by then, you had kids, you never really talked about what your financial experience was in college. You may not know what their thoughts are and what their experiences were. So I really recommend people have a good conversation with their partner before they start talking to their kids about college, to understand, what are your thoughts? Do you believe in borrowing? Do you want your kids to work? How comfortable are you with sort of really encouraging them to look for scholarships? And then sit down and talk with your child, figure out their expectations. Many kids, there was a study, I forget who did it, I should have noted it on here. Many kids really think that their parents are going to pay for whatever school they want to go to, which is very, very striking, because the percentage of parents that are going to be able to do that is very small. So it's about having, I call it the college money talk, have it with your kids, and help them understand, what your thoughts are on paying for college and what you're willing to do. Are you willing to borrow? Are you willing to postpone retirement? Are you willing to, be tough and cut them off? Are you willing to match funds that they earn through working? I tell everybody to write it down and post it on your fridge, maybe laminate it for the next couple of years, because again, if you think back to the pressure, there's going to be a lot of pressure to sort of just sign on the dotted line, and I want you to have, have something to refer to about what you're really willing to do when that happens.
Yeah, and I just want to add that, I mean, I've seen many cases, I'm sure, Nannette, you have horror stories too, where, parents are not on the same page, where, one feels that, that, they have kind of an obligation to pay for whatever school their kid wants, and for however long that they want, whereas the other parent feels like it's really important. They want to help their child, but they also feel it's important for them to have some kind of like skin in the game, is the phrase I've heard used. And so if they aren't on the same page, I mean, it can really just kind of set things up for conflict.
Yeah, so this is like the best place to start before we even get into all the other pieces. Okay, so moving on to what I call the unicorn college. This is, trying to find a school that's going to be a good fit both on the academic and social sides, which I think, school counselors, a lot of other people really think about making sure you can find the right fit for your child, but then we really focus on finding the financial fit. And the unicorn college to us is the one that fits all of those, because one of the most expensive ways to go through college is to transfer. And so, it's important to really look at finding the right fit the first time around. Most people don't know, but most published graduation rates are 6-year graduation rates, and for public colleges, those are about 60%. For private colleges, that's about 65. The 4-year graduation rates are abysmal, honestly, for both, slightly over 50% for private colleges. And I think Sarah and I talked about this. When I went to college, if you didn't graduate in 4 years, everybody kind of looked at you funny. And I think that's, honestly, it's kind of gone away, and there's not as much pressure to graduate in 4 years. But if your child is on the 6-year plan, it's going to cost you, 50% more. So it's really important to research the graduation rates of the schools that you're looking at. Know the value of the degrees and the major. I do believe that college is a great place for, learning and growing and becoming an adult, but at the end of the day, there has to be a reason that you're there, and, a return on that investment, and understanding, what kind of jobs are available, what kind of internships are available. That's really important, to have sort of that end goal in mind. And then the last one is to know how financial aid is awarded. As we're going to talk about going forward, every school really has their own policy. So start with the financial aid, part of the school's website, and really learn about their philosophy on financial aid. Okay, so the big question is, can you afford it at all? And I know that a lot of people feel obligated to help pay, but really, you want to look at a couple of different things to really figure out if you can afford to help. Are your own finances solid? If you're living paycheck to paycheck, if you are concerned about your, paying the bills right now, people have lost jobs, that's really the place to start. And if the answer is no, then you have to look at alternatives to borrowing a ton of money to pay for school. You need to have an emergency fund. You need to be saving for retirement in order, to set yourself up for the future. You can't borrow for retirement. And do you have excess cash flow? If you don't, again, it's going to be really difficult to put extra money toward helping to pay for school. All right, so I like to talk about kind of a 3-bucket strategy when I talk about putting together a budget for school. A lot of people have savings, whether that's in a specific school, 529 plan, or a Coverdell education savings account, or just, a kid's savings account that they've had for a long time. A lot of people do have some savings available to use. A lot of people finance part of it out of their cash flow, like I just said. If you've got extra money left over at the end of the month, that's, you're going to want to try to put some of that toward paying for school sort of as you go. And then the third bucket is loans. And it's unfortunate that most people have to borrow to pay for school, but we'll talk a little bit later about what I think the maximum should be for that. But in general, I tell families to plan to pay, maybe a third from each bucket. Again, like I said, if you don't have any savings and you don't have any cash flow, it's going to be really, really difficult to finance a college education with just loans. So keep in mind, are there other places that you can get help? Grandparents, friends, does your company give out scholarships? Those are things to think about. Are there tax savings that you're going to be eligible for while your kids are in school? That really does help, go toward paying for school. And the bottom line is there's going to be schools you can't afford, and that, that's the unfortunate reality out there today.
I just want to jump in, Nannette, and say that, I think that this a third framework just makes each component of that like more achievable. Sometimes in working with like parents of younger kids, and maybe they're setting up some college savings for the first time, and they can't really, afford to put much away, and it just seems like, well, why bother? Because, I guess we'll just hope for financial aid because, we'll never be able to save enough, to fully cover the cost of college. But if you think about it as like, okay, well, you don't need to save enough to fully cover the cost of college. Like, you just want to be able to contribute. And so, this a third framework is I just think it gives parents more options.
Yeah, I would agree. Okay, so here's the exciting part: financial aid. Everybody loves financial aid, but this is sort of the second step in this process, where you really do need to educate yourself about what financial aid is and what it's not. So I wanted to start here by outlining the financial aid process. For most people, they think of the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid, and it is free. There are people you can pay to help you fill it out, but honestly, I think your best bet is to just educate yourself, go on the student aid website, and understand what the FAFSA is looking for. That process of filling that out and submitting that form, it will spit out your federal EFC, which is your expected family contribution. And no one has ever told me, oh my gosh, that's so much less than I thought it was going to be. Unfortunately, we'll talk a little bit about how it's calculated in the next couple of slides, but it really is shockingly high for some families. So, just keep that in mind. The next step, sort of in conjunction with the FAFSA, is about 300 or so schools require the CSS profile, and I put a link here to the College Board website, but all you really need to do is search which schools require CSS, and this will come up. It's not free. The College Board takes a cut of every school you want to send it to. It is actually spits out a school-specific EFC, and it's not really something that they tell you. It's just the school gets that information from the profile and uses it in their financial aid calculation. So that could be different than the federal EFC. We'll talk a little bit about those differences on one of the following slides as well. And then some schools have additional forms that are school specific. You'll want to check the financial aid website of the schools that you're interested in to find out how much more information that they require. And this is an invasive process. They want to know all about your family finances. And I've seen people, complain about how much information they have to provide. But the bottom line is if you want to be eligible for federal or institutional financial aid, then you need to provide the information. So after schools take in all of that information, they'll send you an award letter in the spring. You can compare awards. Oftentimes it is difficult. There's tools online that'll allow you to compare because each school sort of names different pieces of the aid package differently. So that can be a process in itself of how to compare these two awards. Are they apples to apples or are they different? And, sometimes it's important to ask for reconsideration, which is, I don't want to call it negotiation because, schools really don't like you to say, I want to negotiate this award. But if you have two similar schools that your child has applied to and the award letters are very different, you could go back to the lower one and say, my child is very interested in your school. Is there anything you can do to increase the award to be more comparable to this other school? And then at the end of the process, the student accepts the financial aid. You don't have to accept all of it. If you don't want your child to be working, you don't have to accept work study, for example. You don't have to accept all of the loans they offer you. And then there will be entrance counseling for loans, which is lame at best, but they do try to at least let kids know and the impacts of borrowing. But there is.
Is that a new thing?
No, it's not. It used to. I feel like back when we did it, it was like a paper that you had to sign, and or there was like a video you had to watch or something like that. It's not. Counseling is a very generous word for it. It's really just sort of a CYA for the government, in my opinion.
Got it.
Well, and I will say, I'm honestly, I'm not sure if they require it for parents. I don't think private loan lenders do either. So that's one thing to consider. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the timing for the class of 2021. We do have some folks with kids that are probably in this, in this situation right now, rising seniors. College will begin in the fall. Admissions applications are coming up. I think the Kamien app opens soon. For some schools, the earlier you apply, the better. But just understand if you do early decision or early action, you may not be as eligible for financial aid. So just keep that in mind. The FAFSA will be available October 1st of 2020. And I usually recommend that families get on that and try to fill it out as soon as possible because a lot of the financial aid is first come, first served from, from a federal perspective, some of the grants, and also from a state perspective. And I do want to mention, if your child is looking at schools in multiple states, you might want to look up the requirements for your particular state to see if you need to list a school in your state first. Anyhow, the tax figures that are used for what we call your base year for income will be 2019. So for rising seniors, there's not a lot you can do about this because 2019 taxes, well, because of the coronavirus, they're not due till 2 weeks from now, but normally they would have been completed by now, but you can't really impact your 2019 income. On the other hand, on the asset figures, they are as of the day you file. So, there are opportunities sometimes. We'll talk a little bit about the assets that they look at in a couple slides. There are opportunities sometimes to continue to be able to plan even up until the day that you file. I do recommend that every family should plan to file the FAFSA unless you can write a check for the entire cost of attendance. And that's just because you never know when something can change with your family situation, and you want to have that on file with the financial aid office. Like I said, you can consider asset strategies all the way up until the day you file. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. And for kids that are younger, you do still have time to consider, are there income and tax strategies that you can employ prior to filling out the financial aid forms in order to improve your situation. Okay, so this is the exciting part. Everybody loves math. So how is the EFC calculated? It's really made up of 4 components, and the most important component is parent income. So we get a lot of questions about, what should I do with this retirement account? I have home equity, I have, these assets, but honestly, for families that make over, say, $75,000 to $100,000 a year, the biggest hit to sort of their financial aid hopes really comes from their income side. 47% of every dollar over, say, I don't know, $50,000 a year is considered 47 cents that you can pay towards school. And I don't know anybody that can pay 47 cents out of every dollar of their family's income towards school. So that's shocking to a lot of people. On the asset side, it's a small percentage. It's up to 5.64%. There is an asset allowance. So I don't know if you might have heard that. You might have seen people talking about that. This asset allowance has been actually declining in the last 10 years. I think it's gone from like $50,000 per family down to like $12,000, just as an example. So if you had a kid that went to college 4 or 5 years ago and you fill out the EFC or you fill out the FAFSA today and it's different, you're like, what the heck happened? The formula actually can change every year with regards to these allowances. On the other hand, student assets and income are a little bit more straightforward. Student assets are counted at 20%, and this does not include 529 accounts that are either in the student's name, where either student is the owner, the parent is the owner, but it does include like just regular, UTMA accounts. Those are student assets. The UTMA 529s are considered differently, and they are counted under the parental asset bucket. So, it used to be a strategy to say for kids in these UTMA, UGMA accounts, and that is sort of more of a negative than having it into a 529 account. On the income side, it's 50% of student income per year they expect. Now, granted, that's on a 2-year lag, so just kind of keep that in mind. But definitely assets and income that are in the student's name are pretty heavily weighted.
What's the allowance on
that? It's like whatever the standard deduction is.
Okay.
Like 6,500 or 100 or something like that. So your student can make up to a certain amount of income, and also federal work studies not counted in that. So there are, there's a little bit of wiggle room there. And basically the total of all 4 of these components summed up is your expected family contribution. And like I mentioned earlier, it's almost always going to be higher than you think it should be. Okay, and if you guys have questions, again, we'll be taking Q&A at the end, and we can touch on any particular sort of questions you have about this. But the formula is actually published for the FAFSA, and there's like a 48-page document that the government puts out. So if you're curious, you can Google it and get educated on it. Okay, so a lot of parents that we work with ask, what are accessible on the FAFSA? And like I mentioned, cash, 529 plans for all children because you can change the beneficiary, other education savings accounts, traditional mutual funds, bonds, stocks, investment accounts. Rental real estate is definitely counted on the FAFSA. So if you have a second home that you rent out, then that equity in that home will be counted, and any vacation properties that you own, the equity in that home is also counted. On the other hand, one of the biggest mistakes I see people making is putting their retirement assets under, I think that FAFSA calls them investments. Your retirement assets are not what they're looking for there, and so they should all be excluded. Traditional IRAs, Roth IRAs, these are qualified retirement accounts, not just money you have in a savings account that you're planning to use for retirement. Pensions, annuities, cash value, life insurance, home equity is not counted on the FAFSA. So this is one of the differences, again, that we'll talk about with the CSS profile and the FAFSA. And a small business is also not counted on the FAFSA. So, a lot of parents that we work with do have small businesses, so that's something that you don't need to worry about, with regards to the FAFSA. And, the key for us is that we can really help with parents figuring out which of their assets fall into these categories, and which are the best assets to pull money from to help pay for college and to, increase your opportunity to be able to be eligible for financial aid. Okay, so as I mentioned, there are some differences between the FAFSA and the CSS profile. The CSS profile is really, like I said, in each institution picks from hundreds of questions that they could ask, and they decide which ones to put in for their particular methodology, and they can actually count your answer differently. So for example, with regards to home equity, like I said, the FAFSA does not include it at all for your primary residence. The CSS profile may ask you what's your home equity, or what's the value of your home, how much do you owe on your mortgage, how much do you have in, home equity loans. But then each school has the ability to count that differently. And some schools use all of your home equity as something that you could use to pay for school, and some of them completely ignore it. Stanford is one that just recently made the change to completely ignore home equity in their financial aid calculation. But really every school is different, and honestly, even if you ask how they consider it, they may not give you an answer. Some schools clearly state it on their website, and others really like to sort of hide their financial aid calculation, and they don't let people know how they calculate it, and that reduces our ability to be able to help parents plan. The other place where the CSS profile is very different is how they treat non-custodial parent resources. So the FAFSA, if you follow the way they ask the questions, if you're divorced, the parent who is the custodial parent for FAFSA purposes, and that's different than maybe taxes or maybe a divorce agreement, that's the only person whose information is required on the FAFSA. And obviously, if they've remarried and they're married to someone else, that person's information is required as well. But for the CSS profile, about I'd say maybe 80% of those 300 schools are going to require the non-custodial parents' information also. I see questions all the time about, I'm divorced, my kid's parent doesn't have anything to do with their life, what am I going to do? And the unfortunate thing is schools really don't, they don't allow you to say my ex won't provide the information. They will say, give me his contact information, we will reach out to him or her, and unfortunately, if you are not able to provide, or they are not able to or willing to provide the information that's asked for, then you won't be eligible for institutional financial aid. You are still eligible for federal because that information is not required, but for those institutions, they usually require that information to be provided, and they'll go after it for you if necessary. They're really looking for everybody possible who can contribute. And if your ex is remarried, they will look for that information as well. All right, so you know, a big deal is made about, you know, but I've got financial need. I have financial need, and honestly, need is a calculation. It's not something that you think applies to you. It's basically the total cost of college each year, which is the cost of attendance minus your expected family contribution. And in the eyes of the school and the federal government, that's your financial need. So for each family and for each school, that's going to be different. And less than 100 schools claim to meet full financial needs. So you really are expected to pay even more than this EFC that you've calculated. And, you know, I get this question all the time, how, you know, what can financial need hurt me? And unfortunately, there are schools that it can. If you have $10,000 in financial need based on that calculation, schools that are need blind will not look at your financial aid or financial need at all. If they admit you and they cover 100% of your need, they'll give you that 10K. If they admit you and they don't consider that 5K, or that if they don't pay 100% of financial need, then they may only give you $5,000. On the other hand, need sensitive or need aware schools, they may admit you over somebody that has 20,000 of need, because if they give you full need, they can't afford to pay someone $20,000, or they can't afford to discount somebody's tuition $20,000, and they'll give you $10,000. So that would be a school that is aware of need and would maybe admit students with lower need. And then there's some that you may or may not get admitted, but then you still wouldn't get your full need covered. So there's really 4 different kinds of schools that that can exist out there. It's really important to research again on the financial aid website which kind of school the ones are that you're looking for. Okay, so there's a couple different kinds of financial aid. There's the need-based financial aid, and that's really awarded through gifts, which don't have to be paid back, like scholarships and grants, or self-help, which I call it, where those are things you either have to pay back, as in student loans, or you have to work to earn that money through work study. And then on, sort of the other side, there's merit-based. And these are really scholarships that the schools give out that are recognizing academics, certain talents, or leadership, sports. I guess sports isn't really considered merit-based, but is, an outstanding talent that they would recommend, or that they would recognize. And again, these are gifts, these are scholarships. So just be aware of what the school requires you to do in order to maintain your eligibility, whether it's a GPA, progress toward graduation, or some other requirement. The bottom line is that financial aid, the process has 2 purposes. It allows the state and federal governments to decide if you're eligible for that financial aid money, and it allows schools to decide whether they'll give you their money, and sometimes, like I said, whether or not to admit you. Going through the financial aid process is not going to give you all of the money that you think you might need to attend whatever school it is that your child wants to attend. That's the unfortunate reality. So I tell people in my book, there's no financial aid fairy. This is, it's really important to understand this process and understand the reality of what it can bring to, your ability to pay for school. Okay, so at the end of the day, what you pay is not the sticker price on the school's website. You're going to see the net price calculators on on all schools' website. And what, really your net price is going to be different than your neighbor's net price, because it's a combination of 4 different things. It's the cost of attendance of the school that you're looking at, your family's expected family contribution, the percentage of need that a college meets, like I mentioned earlier, and then your particular student's academic credentials. That's all going to be smished together by each school, and it spits out your net price, and that's sort of what you're going to have to pay to go to school. Now, whether or not that's something that you can afford, you need to go back to your budget and decide, is this reasonable for my family? So I recommend everybody, if you're looking at 10 different schools, go try out their net price calculators and see what see what they spit out for you. The more involved the calculator is, the better information it will give you.
And I've heard that the net price, like 30%, the average, it works out to be is like 30% off the sticker price. But maybe that depends on a school. Like,
Yeah, I think it depends. Yeah, I think it depends on a school. Because honestly, like state schools, public schools almost never give any sort of merit aid. Most of it's need-based aid. Ivy Leagues don't give any merit-based aid because everybody is very achievement focused. So that's need-based aid. I would say it really depends on the kind of school.
Okay.
So there's a ton of areas of confusion with regards to financial aid. I don't have time to go through all of these today. But again, this is where, somebody with the knowledge and the expertise like we have can help, help get you through that process. And honestly, it's really about having this be part of your entire financial comprehensive plan to get you through now and, now in retirement, because a lot of mistakes can be made during this time that can really derail your finances for a long time, and we really want to help people avoid making those mistakes. All right, so the final step in all of this is picking the right school. This is the most important decision, and the best way to improve your financial situation and make smart money decisions is to pick the right school and plan to pay for 4 to 6 or more years. So when I look at the combination between merit and need with a particular family, most often we see high merit, low need families. And those are families where we're going to really help them understand, look at merit aid from schools that isn't related to need, private scholarships, school selection, like I said, test prep, I'm going to talk about that in a second, and then tax aid. Are there any tax strategies that that we can help you with? If you're another type of family on this chart, then there's going to be other ways that that we could potentially help out. And just so that you understand that sometimes there's not a lot that we can do, but it's important to be educated and understand what your options are. So, I keep talking about merit aid, and it's really tuition discounts. It's a tool that the schools use to entice high-performing students to attend their school. At the end of the day, schools want kids there that serve a purpose for them, whether that's, increasing, diversity of their student body, increasing their sort of average test scores. Schools use merit aid in order to get the people that they want there. If your child is not a desirable candidate for admission, they're not likely to get merit aid from a particular school. So the best part is that high need and low need students can qualify. So this is really the only way to get your out-of-pocket costs below your expected family contribution. And like I said, none of the Ivy League schools are going to offer this. They really only offer need-based aid. Some schools have a grid, so this is important to understand, especially with so many schools going test optional. I'm curious to see how this plays out because these schools really use a combination of GPA and SAT or ACT scores to determine how much scholarship money they give out. So in the past, I would recommend to families, focused on test prep. If you're on the border, like for this particular school, I think it's Colorado State. If you're on the border between a 28 and a 29 ACT, go get some test prep to see if you can improve that score and get more scholarship dollars. Or if you're between a 26 and a 27, that's gonna impact you potentially, tens of thousands of dollars over the course of your college career and scholarship money. For younger students, understand sort of what the GPA cutoffs are, and try to obviously kids want to get the highest GPA that they can, but understand where the break points are and how much money that could translate into for the schools that you're interested in. Okay, so I have a few minutes here to continue to talk about loans. I don't want to go too long. I do want to leave time for Q&A. But there's basically three different ways to borrow for school: the federal government loans, private student loan lenders that are from banks, and then other options that are a little bit more creative, like home equity, insurance policies, retirement account loans. Normally, we wouldn't recommend anything in the other category, but I want to talk about the first two categories a little bit more. The federal government, these are the direct student loans, and there's two versions of this: subsidized and unsubsidized. Subsidized is need-based, and this is determined by each school, because your need may be different at each school. The amount of subsidized loans you're eligible for might be different at each school. That's a question I just saw recently in a Facebook group. They're available to undergrad students, and this is where the Department of Education pays the interest while your student is in school and during grace periods and deferments. So this is the best deal out there, the subsidized student loans. The unsubsidized are a really good deal also. They're not need-based, and they're really, the subsidized and unsubsidized come from the same bucket. So if you're not eligible for the subsidized, you're eligible for the full amount of unsubsidized. But as you can see at the bottom, there's a cumulative limit and then also a maximum for subsidized. And the unsubsidized is when you pay the interest, or your child pays the interest, or somebody pays the interest while you're in school, or you can defer the interest till you graduate, and that will be added to the principal. So like I said, the cumulative limit is $31,000, and that's for over, an entire undergraduate career. If you do graduate in 4 years, there are yearly limits, and that would total up to $27,000 for unsubsidized loans total. Okay. Oh, one more thing on the direct student loans. These are use it or lose it each year. So I get a lot of parents who say, I've got some in savings. Can I just use all my savings the first year and not take out the loans? Unfortunately, you've then lost that borrowing power. So what we do is try to help parents put together, like I said, that 4-year plan where we say, okay, you'll use this much in savings this year, this much in cash flow, this much in loans, and put together that budget and that bucket strategy so that you're not losing this borrowing power because you can't get it back. Okay, plus loans. I'll be honest, I hate plus loans. Sorry, Sarah. They're like the worst. These used to be, and if you went to school a long time ago, Parent Plus loans were capped, and it was really a small amount, and they were meant for covering small gaps. And unfortunately, during the Obama administration, this was changed, and so parents can actually borrow up to the total cost of attendance minus financial aid. So if you apply to a school and you get in, it costs $75,000, and they don't give you any financial aid, and you have decent credit, you can borrow as a parent $300,000 to send your kid to that school. And nobody should do that. Nobody should do that. But it's possible, and I see people do it all the time, and they get themselves in a big amount of trouble and can't figure out how to pay it off. So anyway, the interest, it's different than the student loans, and interest accrues, it's capitalized, which means it's added to the principal if you don't pay it. There's many fewer repayment options, although it can be deferred. One of the biggest things is there's a 4.236% loan fee, so that's taken right off the top before you even get the proceeds of the loan. The interest rate actually has come down in the past couple of years. It was at about 7.5% a couple of years ago. Now it's down to 5.3% as of July 1st. But I just really caution people, if you're considering plus loans, the school just might not be affordable for your family. So really think about this before you go into it and decide how much you think is reasonable.
That loan fee.
I know. Private student loans, this is really more credit focused. They can be available through banks, Discover Bank, Sallie Mae, all of, the regular people that I'm sure you've heard of. You're going to get a lot of advertising for private student loans. You need to have good credit history. Students usually need a cosigner because they don't have that credit. You don't need financial need. There's a lot of different, you can have variable, fixed interest, rates are usually higher than the direct student loans, but sometimes lower than PLUS loans. So, it's important to look at all of your options. They don't have grace periods typically, and the fees really do vary by lender, as do sort of the features of the loan. Honestly, not to be morbid, but like some of them aren't even discharged if your student dies. So you need to really look at the fine print and understand what you're signing for here. And remember that they're your loans, not necessarily the student loans. All right, other options, like we said, we don't typically recommend, but they can be, strategically used for sort of short-term gaps, would be home equity lines, insurance policy loans, retirement account loans. They do all have pros and cons, so it's just important to be, mindful of the interest rates, fees, repayment terms, because, if you go back to the bucket strategy that I was talking about, the cash flow, if you're thinking about, okay, I don't have cash flow to pay out of pocket for school, well, then you probably don't have cash flow to pay loan payments, if you're adding to your debt to send your kid to school. So, just kind of keep that in mind. And the unfortunate thing is that some of these other options, if something goes wrong, you could lose your house or your death benefit from your insurance policy, or you might have to delay retirement or, declare bankruptcy. And these may seem like dire circumstances, but they do happen. And I think with, the state of the world today, it's more important than ever to sort of consider some of the downside scenarios. Okay, so, if you listen to Sue Zorman, she used to always say, student loan is good debt. Student loan debt is good debt. There are benefits to it as compared to other kinds of debt. The interest rates are usually low for the federal direct loans. The interest can be tax deductible, and the student themselves are investing in themselves, and hopefully it offers a payoff with a higher salary down the road. So that's all for student loans, student borrowing. Those same criteria might not be the same for parents borrowing. The downside of student loans is most of the time they can't be discharged in bankruptcy. And I do think that there is some movement toward trying to loosen these rules, but right now it's very, very few and far between where these will get discharged in bankruptcy. And it really constrains financial choices for 25 years or more while you're repaying them or while your student is repaying them. So, I get...
we definitely see some, clients, with they're spending over $1,000 a month on their student loan payments.
Right. And that doesn't, that doesn't improve anybody's financial situation ever.
Yeah, and that it's part of the reason why millennials statistically have delayed buying houses and starting families and all those things.
Yep. Yep. So, we like to think of a couple of rules of thumb for borrowing. Don't borrow more than the anticipated first year salary. So if your child is an education major and they're going to make 40 grand, that's going to be different than if they are an engineering major and they might make 75 grand coming out of school. The ability to pay back loans is going to be different based on that first year salary. The parents should limit their borrowing, like I said, to small amounts. Keep the anticipated repayments to 10 to 15% of gross income, not 30%, 40%. Don't capitalize interest if you can pay it during school. Take a short repayment period and really only use deferment and forbearance for short-term situations. Okay, so in closing, good, we've got some time for Q&A. So start early. Obviously, if you've got kids that are, younger, start saving if you can. Have the college money talk in middle school. If your kids are older than that, have it today or tomorrow. Put it on the calendar, sit down with them, tell them your experience, tell them what your budget is. Please don't wait until the bill is due before they move in to have this talk, because people do. And then prepare your finances. Get your finances in order to take on this additional burden over the next 5 to 10 years. Learn as much as you can. Research schools, costs, financial aid policies. They're going to be different. One size does not fit all in this space. And I listed a couple of free low-cost resources. Studentaid.gov is the FAFSA website, so start there. There's so much information on there. You could really, read that and get answers to a lot of your questions. DIY College Rankings is a website run by a woman that I think puts out a lot of good content. Savingforcollege.com used to really be focused on, obviously, saving for college, but they've recently sort of transitioned into more information about borrowing and sort of strategies to pay for college, which I think is very useful. And then as always, you can check out my book on Amazon. I might be writing a second edition to update it with some more information. But right now it's available. It's very, reasonable as far as cost is concerned. So I guess we'll open it up for Q&A.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nannette. So I do see one question that was in the chat, and the attendee says, I've done FAFSA before. Is college-specific EFC more complicated in general? It sounds like it is.
Yeah. So if the school, if you've got a younger child or an older child and you've only filled out the FAFSA, and then your next child is going to a school that requires the CSS profile, it is. I don't know if it's more complicated. They just require more information, and the information that they ask is different. So it's, as you're filling it out, there's always a help option to understand the question. But unfortunately, it's not going to be easy to know ahead of time which questions that school is going to be is asking for. And if your student is applying to 4 different schools that require the CSS profile, you may have 25 additional questions on the CSS, and you won't know which school has asked for which question to be answered, because they basically pull it all, they smush them all together into one application and then send the information out to the schools.
Another question is, there's a lot of research here on specific schools. I mean, what's a good number of schools to narrow the search down to if I've got a junior in college?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say no more than 10. And even 10, I think, is a lot.
A lot, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and not only the amount of research and the amount of knowledge you need to have about each school, but application fees have been out of control recently. I don't know if they're going to go down with this whole pandemic thing, but you could be paying $50, $75 per school to apply, and if you're applying for 10 schools, that's like $500 to $1,000. So it's important to, the more you educate yourself ahead of time, I think it's easier to cut colleges off the list that are not affordable or not a good fit. Because the worst thing that I see happen is parents who say, okay, I'm going to let my kid apply to XYZ school, and if they get in, we'll figure it out. And that breaks my heart, because that means that they're either going to have to disappoint their kid if they can't afford it, or they're going to have to put themselves in a sticky financial situation to afford it. So, I definitely cut it down. Definitely knock schools off the list early on before you have to apply.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. This was so informational, and really, I learned some things too. And thank you. And I just want to say, if anyone wants to schedule a meeting and learn more, discuss your situation, you can always schedule a meeting with Nannette at our website, cultivatingwealth.com. There's a Contact Us tab, and you can schedule an intro call with Nannette. We will be sending out a link to the presentation tomorrow. I think it goes out 24 hours after the webinar. And good luck with your students.
Thanks everybody for joining. It was a pleasure. I hope it was useful for you. And like Sarah said, reach out if you've got questions or you could use some additional assistance.
All right. Thanks everybody. Bye.